This program has been brought to you thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons on Patreon. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And for more content like this, be sure to check out the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon. Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Alchemy After Hours. Tonight, we're going to continue our discussion of other planes of existence. Our focus will be communing with the planes and their inhabitants. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's begin.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
This is one of those times where the discussion is inspired, meaning that I was working on other stuff, and this just wouldn't stop pestering me, so I decided, okay, all right, we're going to talk about this because I have a feeling some of you really would like to just hear from another voice. You know, this is what I've experienced. This is how I approach it. And this is what has been the outcome of my endeavors, all right? And so what I want to do is talk about certain questions that always seem to pop into mind, like, who are they? What will they be like? What is their realm like? And what are the bridging principles? What will get me from here to there, or vice versa, if that's even possible? So... And you know, what is there a middle ground in between here and there? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, so first off, to kind of review what we've discussed before regarding other dimensions, other planes of existence. What we're talking about here are planes of existence, which should give you a mental image maybe of plywood, let's say, and each of its layers, or the layers within the atmosphere, or the layers that exist within water, or perhaps even a good olive vinaigrette. As it separates itself, those kind of layers, and that from one to the other, as you're progressing, each layer, you know, the vinaigrette idea is really actually a great metaphor. If you've ever seen like in the store, I used to work retail, and part of that was grocery, and you know, you could always tell the vinaigrettes that have really been sitting there for a while because they had completely separated into their component parts, right? And so there were clear layers between each one of them. And at the very bottom is always the gunk, all the seasoning and everything. It's just kind of distills there. That literally is an apt description of Malkuth when looking at the Tree of Life. Often it's been compared to in some more modern esoteric texts as like Lon Milo Duquette described it. I can't remember which text in particular, but that it's the oil drip pan in the car. It's where all of the stuff that the oil passes through to keep the engine smooth and in clean operation, that oil collects all this stuff, and then eventually it just deposits it into the oil drip pan in the bottom of your car, and it just sits there, right? And then it gets recirculated, but it sits there. If the car sits for a long time, then all that just drips down there into that spot. And that's where it's collected. And so that's kind of the thing at the bottom of the vinaigrette is us. And then everything else kind of stratifies above us depending upon the nature of its composition, specifically what it is comprised of. And the thing to remember is, even though we are apparently on our surface, superficially, we are very different. We are all still part of the same thing. We're all part of the vinaigrette. We're what makes it what it is. And so to keep this in mind then, as an image will help you in our discussion of other entities and other planes of existence, and specifically relating to them. What can we do that will help us relate to them, if that's in fact our desire? It seems to me that this is an appropriate extension of our dialogue relating to servitors, which really is the opposite direction, where you're enlisting the help of something that's half, barely formed. It's formed in and of itself that it's an element, right? It's there. It's an element of intelligence that differentiates itself elementally. So, fire and water and earth and air, and then there are the composite elements that could be drawn from any number of other elements, lava elements or dust storm elements or lightning elements, or, it's just like colors on a color wheel. Those elements will differentiate each other based on their vibratory combinations. And so you've got primary ones, and then by extension, it moves itself outward into secondary and tertiary combinations of all the same. And those combinations of color relating to the vibratory essence of the elements that you're drawing from to create that servitor have a correspondence and intensification as you look the other direction. So as you're seeking to interact with things which are at a higher vibratory status than yourself, perhaps to enlist aid and intelligence, to just gain strength, maybe to feel a sense of love or benevolence or guidance, any one of those things are available. And on the darker side, there is no... I love how folks always like to put this stuff on like a line graph, where zero's in the middle, and then you have -1 and +1, and it moves off to infinity in both directions. And that's supposedly good or evil or light or darkness or whatever. And it's, when speaking in terms of another plane, just as on our plane, you can't look around necessarily and go, well, that's a bad and that's a good person, and that those people are this way and those people are that way. My experience has been you're almost always wrong. Absolutely, and this is because in our plane of existence, all of these things are essentially co-equal, right? The sun shines on the good and the bad, the great and the lowly. Everyone gets sunlight from the same star, and the idea is then that on this plane of existence, that what you are is what you make yourself to be. So in a similar context, if you're looking at a plane of existence with a higher vibratory pattern, this does not necessarily mean, like, we assume that bad things are beneath our vibration. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that you can find good things beneath your vibration as well as bad things. And I think that the stratification is exactly the same as what we see here, that this is a consistent pattern of balance, of interconnectedness, where everything is on a spectrum of being the same thing. And the differentiation then is vibration, but it doesn't mean that you are reduced in station, because I think the way to define it in a more productive way isn't necessarily to look at it subjectively, but objectively in terms of the outcome of its output. So you can have something of a very high vibration that can help elevate and motivate and make you stronger, right? Or that same exact influence in the wrong setting can be completely destructive. And the image that comes to mind is the speaker Tony Robbins, who's just like so incredibly, intensely, awesomely, powerfully motivating that they're, depending upon who you are, if you're seeking that out, then that motivation can really get you going and you want to walk on the fire and do all that exciting stuff. On the other hand, this could just be anathema to you. It could be the thing that just makes your teeth grind and you're like, holy crap, I can't stand it. And so from that perspective, the outcome is always subjective, right? You're looking objectively and saying they're both high vibrate, same person, both very high vibration, right? Both instances, exactly the same guy. You're just cloning him, and it now determines the environment determines the outcome. So in version A, the person is seeking to be lifted up. In version B, the person may not be seeking to have its vibration altered. This doesn't mean that they're in a bad place. It could just mean that intensity is messing with their Zen. And see, this is exactly, that's the one instance. And then you look at this mirror opposite, and let's say you have like a really low-key Buddhist monk who's got a really mellow vibe that's really stabilizing to everybody who's around him. It doesn't have to be a Buddhist monk. It could be any kind of spiritual individual. Some of us have an uncle or a friend who's just the person you want to be next to when you're freaking out, because they're like that solid, calm hillside or mountain, that just is always there and is always comforting to be near, to be resting upon. And that's a really low vibe state. And yet that low vibe state is extraordinarily productive within that plane. See what I'm saying? So you're two things that can operate with it. And so if you are opposed to the thing, if it's disruptive to you, then on a subjective level, we look at it as the villain. And so this is why when you're standing on the three pillars, and let's say you decide to stand in the middle pillar, then when you look to the pillar of light and you speak to its representatives, they're all pointing their finger at the pillar of darkness, okay, the dark black pillar, and they're saying, holy crap, those guys are the worst. They're absolutely the worst. They're dark and they're secretive, and all of the things that they do are, retard growth, and they go on and on. And on the other end of it, on the dark side, looking to the light, they're like, hey, these guys are disruptive, they're destructive, they cause pain, they expose everything, and they go on and on and on, right? And no matter what, both of these two members on either side look at the other side as the villain to all that they would hold to be dear, right? It is anathema to them. It is in direct opposition, in juxtaposition to everything that they want. It is that thing that would oppose all things that they would try to do. And in the middle of that conflict is us. And the reason why I'm trying to explain this is so that this interaction, this conflict that results in synergy and synthesis and catharsis and every other cis you can think about. This union becomes all of reality. It becomes us. We are the composite of that interaction. We are the product of that interaction. And on each plane, that principle exists. That is one of the principles that exists that become later what I would suggest is a bridging principle. Okay? So who these entities are, I have no specific name, but mythology is filled with their avatars. The more recent mythologies have us in a Piscean juxtaposition where good and evil are opposed to each other and riding against each other at all times. That's part of the whole Piscean age outcome, was all of these things that were aggregating and being unified at the end of the age of Aries were then changed and altered so that we now looked at them on this line graph where the things are either good or bad, light or darkness, and we evaluated all things in the last 2,000 years on that really, really narrow basis. American politics literally is the quintessential example of this, where we have a two-party system that looks at each other as the absolute villains, and there's never going to be agreement there. Only in the rarest of occasions do we find in modern politics a kind of moderation between these two parties. They are absolutely and totally and completely entrenched against each other, and they represent those two pillars, and we're all out here in the middle, right? But the idea then is that all of us can be seen as a kind of mirror of everything that is around us, both upwards and downwards. And I have found personally that by adopting this paradigm, it makes it a bit easier to interact with them. Now that leads me to my next point. So who they are is in a sense a reflection of who we are. And this then extends so that when we ask ourselves, what will they be like? We also want to ask, what kinds of entities will I attract? Or more specifically, who will find me attractive? So, and this then brings us to that quality of being attractive is a masculine projection of the self, okay? It's attraction and penetration are the two masculine properties, and the two feminine properties are repulsion and reception. So you can see how they're similar to each other and yet not quite. But because of what they are, if someone is attractive, then someone can be receptive. And by being receptive, then you have union, right? And then from that, it just continues. But you want to maintain that idea of being attractive, which means that you're pushing your mind into a realm that exceeds outside of yourself. And the guiding principle that I have found is this, that birds of a feather flock together, and like likes like. Those two ideas combined give you the sense then that if you are a person who is kind, benevolent, loving, giving, and sincere, then you're going to start attracting entities to you that are like that. If you are one who is cruel or vindictive or selfish or duplicitous, then you'll find that the things that are drawn to you will reflect the properties that you carry within yourself. It's for this reason, and this reason alone, that every esoteric text that talks about communion with entities outside of the self, and I'm speaking of the classics here, okay, counsel that one goes through periods of purification, because you don't want to interact with things that then if you're dangerous, so are they, is essentially the idea. Live by the sword, die by the sword. So if that is the emote that you're bringing with you as you move into a new plane, then that you will find those things drawn to you. It's the admonition then is ever present, which is that to the pure all things are pure, and to the base all things are base. And we're not all pure, okay? Mother Teresa, we are not. We're people. We each have a composition with ourself that involves shadow, that involves darkness, and the work around that is self-knowledge. Because it is once you come into ownership of your darker self, once you embrace it, you can't reject it. The more power you dump into the rejection of one's shadow, of one's dark self, the more power that thing has. the more power it has, the more substance it has, the more it can push back against you. It's just like the weird plant in Harry Potter, the first one, when Harry and Hermione and Ron fall through the floor and they land into this plant, that the more you struggle against it, the more it crushes you. And the only way to get out of it is to just go limp. And in the same sense, the more you fight that darker self, the more that you hate it, the more you resent it, the more energy you put into it from fear because you don't want it to emerge at the wrong time, right? This could be the dark self of anger, that unrestrained, seething inferno that might be inside of you and that can erupt Hulk-sized, with just the right combination of input. Yeah, that stuff. If that stuff is still in you unrestrained, not understood, right? Not unified with you, then you'll find yourself exposed to what you are as a reflection of your environment that you are seeking to enter into. There is a composition that I find reflected here with us as human beings or animals. When you look around to different groups of animals that pack up, or run in prides, packs, prides, or herds, or flocks, that they aggregate together because they have similar interests, similar behaviors, and they reject things that are not part of the self, which gives you a kind of tree idea as you're moving your mind up and down between vibratory states. Because remember, as I said at the beginning, interacting with things of a lower vibratory state does not mean that they're evil. It just means they're a lower vibratory state. Good or evil are subjectively determined by the product of the outcome of the interaction between forces, just as we talked. I keep emphasizing this because it is so mistaught. We don't understand that it's both a vertical and a lateral dissemination of force, and that the expression of that force manifests as consciousness across the board, literally laterally across the board. So you have a longitudinal force, which is coming from the center of all things and moving outward, and then you have a lateral force, which is going from side to side and distributing consciousness across the board in different forms, which are variations of the same thing on that plane. Okay, so it's really important. At least I have found it's really important to have a real good grasp on all of this before beginning, because it helps you navigate later. It helps you understand what it is that you're experiencing. And it answers questions that, for instance, that I was asked about how far things can go and what is the sense of it all. Because of the nature of our material creation, the impression of the spirit upon the mind and the body is always classified as subtle. Now subtle is like a fragrance that might pass by as you walk by a room and you're like, that smells like vanilla or lavender, but it's very faint. It's very hard to detect unless you're either looking for it or you have prepared yourself to be receptive for it. It's often been said that the searchers of truth and spirit would often benefit if they could just understand the first intimations of that vibratory spirit, that thrumming of spirit that can pass through us. And all of us are capable of being sensitive to it. It requires only work and focus. And this is where the mind comes in, because it is the body that feels that vibration. It's the body that feels it. And then the body's expression is without words until the mind quantifies the experience through language. It codifies it and brings it into a distilled form that could then be exchanged with other people. And you say, wow, I got a real creepy feeling, or man, this place feels amazing. Whichever direction you want to go, it definitely, again, is always quantified by the mind. The body is what feels the intimation of the spirit. It causes a quavering of the heart, a shortness of breath, the tingling of the hairs on the back of the neck or arms, that cold sensation going up your spine, the sick feeling in your stomach, the lack of ability to breathe. These are all things that tingling of the fingers or toes, a sudden stiffness or inability to walk or move comfortably. You just suddenly become unable to move your body. You have to think about it. These are all sensations that I have felt and interpreted in different ways depending upon the context of the scene or setting and where I was and who was with me and what we were doing at the time. And these are things that the mind provides for you, and it does so after the fact, so that each time that you go through some kind of experience, you begin by preparing yourself for the fact that, hey, that might be my experience, but you do this in short steps so that you can understand, that you'll need time to process what it is that you're experiencing. And then over time, as you process more and more, you have greater facility or language whereby you can express to yourself, which is the most important, and to others, what it is that you're feeling or experiencing or relating to. I'm just throwing all that in because it feels like it's important to give you as many tools as possible when pursuing this kind of activity. And the foremost tool is the recognition that self-knowledge is of paramount importance. And it's important because of the like principle. The next question then is, what is their realm like? Well, the realm is composed or stratified, in my experience, based on, as I've described to you, its degree of vibration relative to the self. Those things which are of a lower vibratory essence or pattern tend to be slower. And those things that have a higher vibratory essence or pattern tend to feel faster. And it feels like more time is spent when I move in higher planes, and less time is spent when I'm in lower planes. Even though the lower planes, because of the nature of their vibration, it's like 10 minutes there is 100 minutes here. Okay? So it doesn't seem like you're there very long. And yet it's a whole lot of time here. And in the same context, moving upward to a higher vibration, it feels like more time is spent up there, but in reality, it's less time. So 1 minute here is like 10 minutes there. So if I'm moving my mind to a lower plane, which would be by definition one of a reduced or lower vibratory pattern, then spending 10 minutes there is the equivalent of a good 100 minutes here. So it gives you a sense of how time elapsed physically. Okay, it's the mind is recounting time all in the same. The mind is not really differentiating moment to moment, because within the realm of the mind there is no time. Time must be witnessed as the progression of events, right? Time is a principle, as we've discussed before, relating to vibration and rhythm, right? So things click and start and stop. They have cycles. And when you are within the mind, time is co-equivalent. So there are no cycles to witness within the expanse of one's mind. However, the mind is aware of the body. And so an internal clock exists where the mind can interpret the amount of time that has been spent, and often the mind can be fooled. The body will say, no, we've been sitting here over an hour. And the mind's like, wow, it seems like I've only been there for like 10 minutes. And that's how that works. Now, on the other end, the body is here for 10 minutes, but when you move upward in a higher vibratory space, because the vibration and rhythmic pattern of things is now sped up, so too, time is sped up, and it seems like you're spending a lot more time up there than you do on the other side, because you're witnessing the sense of vibratory increase. And so it just speeds up. So 10 minutes here is like 100 minutes there. And that's just a arbitrary designation to give you a sense of roughly what it feels like. It's like a 1 to 10 ratio. And I imagine that it could be less or more depending upon where you're going. I'm simply giving you if we're the meat in the sandwich, then I'm giving you where the bread is at. And only the first layer of that bread as it's touching the lettuce or the meat or whatever, if you're vegetarian, then an avocado sandwich or something. So, but that's what that's like. And the realm, so that's the sense of time in realms, faster as you go higher and slower as you go lower, right? Which makes sense. There's an actual physics analogy to this. One simply has to only consider the atom, right? And the idea of the atom and its vibration, which is so fast that we can't see it, right? You look at your table and it's a solid object, even though it's a very comparatively low vibration relative to its environment. But on an atomic scale, things move very rapidly there, right? And as you move upward and outward, things begin to go slower. So, and then as we scale this up to the solar system, right, as you draw closer into the sun, the satellites which orbit the sun orbit at a much slower rate. And as you move out from the sun, the satellites which orbit the sun move at a much longer rate, right? It takes many more years for satellites to orbit the exterior of the sun and of our solar system than the interior of the solar system. And as we expand that idea then out, it's all fractal. It just expands one step further out, so that when we're within the galaxy, all the events that take place within our solar system would appear to be rather rapid relative to the orbit of our solar system through the galaxy on the outer rim. So I just want you to get that idea that naturally things scale up and progress. And as you're on the inside, the innermost, uppermost levels, things vibrate very fast and time seems to speed along. And when you're on the outermost areas, time seems to slow down, and in moving up, it speeds up. So in this sense, time is relative, but time is still the same. A click on a clock is still a click on a clock. It's just that you're having a lot more of those moving higher and farther inward than moving outside and more outward. So it's important to recognize time, because it's a huge feature of where we are at all times. All things obey the principle of vibration and rhythm. So time is a component of that, which is why I've spent so much time talking about time, because it's just that important. It's a major paradigm shift to be able to let go of what we've been taught and embrace this other idea of time as a principle of vibration, right? As through the function of the principle of rhythm. Beyond that, I can't provide an adequate description, because because I lack words to describe, really. I just don't, I don't, more than what I can in principle describe. It's always a sensation, right? You don't leave. Your body's still here. You're still breathing. You're in a room that's quiet, And we're going to talk about 3 forms of meditation in another episode. But for now, just realize that you're in that state, and that state can be with your eyes open or closed or both. Well, I guess you'd be blinking if it was both. Anyway, we'll talk about meditation in another episode. But it's important to recognize that you are essentially creating within yourself the gate to the realm that you wish to inhabit. And the gate is created as a result of the vibration that you create within yourself through a process of your mind choosing to do a thing, choosing to either elevate or reduce one's vibration. Remember, you can be calm and relaxed, and motionless and still in a very high vibratory state, as much as you could be calm, relaxed, and motionless in a very low vibratory state. And it is one's mind and the direction of that state that will determine its outcome. Okay? So there's a lot in there. And the next thing to talk about then is what are the bridging principles? What principles connect our realms together most easily? So the hint to this is that vibration leads to correspondence. And this relates specifically then to the what will they be like? It's like there's a couple ways to approach this. And the ways to do it are, one way would be that each of you occupy the same key on a music register, let's say. So you are at middle C, and you could then, unify with someone who is at an upper C or a lower C, right? And each of you can sing that same note together and harmonize as the C. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be to sing your chord, to create a musical chord of your own design. And so in this sense, instead of drawing to you, let's say, a lower C and an upper C, you're drawing the 2 notes that are a component of that chord, so that when that chord is played, and musical chords played well, you now have a whole song, right? And it's done as a result of you and then 2 other notes unifying together. And so they can, the entities then that you seek to have relationship with, to unify with, to combine with, to negotiate with, to partner with, because each of these are collaborative. There's another fun fact to think about with regard to the musical chord, and that has to do with the idea that a musical chord seems to me to be reflective of our overall reality. And so the sense is that there is no true difference in the tap of the piano hammer on the chords in question. What is different is the degree of vibration on the length of the string that is played by the hammer as it strikes. And so the longer string, the lower the vibration, right? And the shorter the string, the higher the vibration. There's a correspondence then to the music being played, one being a lower note and one being a higher note. But the force between them is the same. It is the pressing of the key by the hand of the player, and the pressure is always the same, unless they're really emphasizing a part of the music. But let's not break the analogy. You know what I mean, that they're pushing each key the same. This then, the music itself and a musical chord can facilitate as an analogy then for our experience, and also what can be expected to be experienced as you move your mind up and down, depending upon the vibration that you wish to emulate. And that is that the spirit, the mind, and the body are the musical chord of life. and that the spirit is of the higher vibratory note, the mind is in that middle place, and the body is the low vibratory note. And played together, they become the song of our lives. So I just want to point that out because that is then represented. It corresponds, is in my experience, that exact principle is the same wherever you go. What differentiates it is the amount of physical composition of the entity in question. So those of a higher vibratory state have a lower degree of body, right, in the mix. And those of a lower vibratory state have more of that. And so we look at the two and we say, okay, there's a property to the stone, to this crystal. And it is representative of whatever resides within it. You can feel it. It's the slow, thrumming personality that some people become quite eccentric about and name it and give whole dialogues as to the entity that might be present within that stone. But nevertheless, there is a sense that there is a property of intelligence that could reside there. But it resides in the stone or in the rock or in the sand or in the mountain or, what have you. That lower physical vibratory thing, and the properties, of course, elevate upward in its own vibratory plane. So the wind and the rain and the fire and all of that has been characterized as possessing a kind of intelligence that is harnessed or released or utilized. As you move from ourselves upward, what you get is a situation where there is a less dependence upon physicality. And as a result, the essence of those entities seems a bit more omnipresent because they're not restrained by the quality of their physical form. So that's more of what it's like, what they're like. You don't have to pursue both top and bottom or two vibes at the same time or create a chord. These are all examples, advanced principles and ideas that you'll use later in your toolbox or might use right now when you're like, oh man, I've been waiting to hear this. So that might be one of the things. And the essences that you are looking for to help you to move forward in your own pursuit. So the overarching bridging principle then would be the principle of vibration. And this vibration then allows you to achieve a correspondence wherein, regardless of what plane you happen to be on now, you can interact at the very least with the planes directly above and beneath you relative to your own vibration. And then as you learn to attenuate your vibration, moving downward and slowing your vibration, right, to be less and less disruptive to the things around you. And as a result of reducing your vibratory footprint and drawing that within you and being still, letting that become very, very still, that's when these things within your physical environment are capable of revealing themselves to you, because you've slowed yourself down enough. And the only way to commune with those entities is to slow yourself down. And it is my impression that is a component of this, of a component of slowing oneself down. It helps one see or sense, rather, have a sense through the veil. You never, I guess that's why there's just this thing over our consciousness that prohibits the waking mind from perceiving completely and unrestricted through the veil. You just never get to see the countenance of what it is that you're communing with, per se. One determines their countenance as a reflection of oneself based on one's vibratory energy. So as you still yourself and become calmer, the essence of the environment, the elementals within the environment, become easier to perceive by you, and you'll be able to work within the framework of that domain that interacts with our own. Okay? And then conversely, on the opposite end of that is you can still be still, but now intensify your vibratory state. And that then allows you to move upward in the same degree, the same fashion. And commune with those things that are just above us, higher and more central. And in either case, the thing that I find fascinating is that in both cases, you begin within yourself and then you make a decision. And one decision is to move outward, and one decision is to move further inward. And when you move further outward, things begin to slow down. And when you move further inward, they begin to speed up relative to the location of the self within our frame of reference. I know it's a lot to talk about. I'm like, I'm all out of coffee. I am clean out of coffee, and y'all know how much I love my coffee. But yeah, I felt like this would be a good topic to continue our discussion in. This is definitely, advanced material here that we're talking about. And the advanced component of this is one's desire to relentlessly pursue self-knowledge and then self-acceptance. You have to come to terms with what you are in order to engage with things both within and outside of oneself as you progress up and down, in and out of various vibratory states, and which then link us to these planes and to their occupants. Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight for Alchemy After Hours. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and I'll be talking to you real soon.